The familiar, comforting crunch of gravel beneath the tires of Liam Croft's pickup truck was the sound of a promise kept. After 12 years as a captain in the Army Corps of Engineers, years spent in dust-choked conflict zones where the very concept of home felt like a fragile, distant dream, this modest cottage on Oak Bend Lane was his anchor. It was his inheritance, his sanctuary, his final posting. The inheritance from his grandfather, the man everyone called Pops, was more than just a property. It was a legacy of quiet strength and deep roots in the Texas soil. For Liam, it represented a life after service, a chance to trade the roar of generators and the weight of body armor for the whisper of the wind through the live oaks and the simple, honest work of restoring the old house. The cottage itself was a testament to Pops's practical nature. It was charmingly weathered, with sage-green shutters that were slightly faded and a wide front porch that seemed to beckon for a rocking chair. It wasn't pristine, but it was solid. It had character. To Liam, the overgrown flower beds and the slightly leaning garden shed weren't eyesores. They were stories. They were evidence of a life fully lived, and he looked forward to the therapeutic labor of bringing them back to their former glory. As the movers began the slow, clumsy ballet of unloading a life, his grandmother's antique writing desk, crates of books on structural engineering and military history, the simple, functional furniture that had followed him from base to base, Liam allowed himself a moment of profound relief. He leaned against the side of his truck, the warm Texas sun on his face, and breathed in the scent of cedar and wild bergamot. This was it. This was peace. The intrusion, when it came, was as subtle as a sniper's shot. She emerged from the house next door, a structure so aggressively perfect it looked like a museum diorama. There was no casual amble in her step, no wave of neighborly greeting. Beverly Bev Gallagher moved with a sharp, unnerving purpose, her stride eating up the perfectly manicured lawn that separated their properties. She was a woman constructed of severe lines, a razor-straight platinum bob, the knife-edge crease in her khaki capris, the angular cut of her collared shirt. Her eyes, a flinty, calculating blue, bypassed Liam's face entirely, conducting a swift, merciless inventory of the moving van, the scuffed leather of his boots, and the faint dusting of pollen already settling on his truck. "You must be the new owner," she stated. It wasn't a question. Her voice had a dry, rasping quality, like stones grinding together. "I'm Beverly Gallagher, president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association." Liam, falling back on ingrained politeness, offered a smile. "Liam Croft, it's good to meet you. This was my grandfather's place." Bev's smile was a perfunctory, fleeting twitch of facial muscles that didn't reach her eyes. "We're aware of the history of the property. That's precisely why I'm here." From behind her back, she produced a binder. It wasn't a casual stack of papers. It was a monstrous 3-inch thick leatherette-clad tome. The cover was emblazoned with a severe logo and the words, "Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions," in a font that screamed zero tolerance. Liam accepted it. The physical weight was surprising, a dense block of rules and regulations. "Consider this your welcome packet," Bev continued, her gaze now sweeping over his lawn, her nose wrinkling almost imperceptibly at the sight of a few dandelions daring to bloom near the fence line. "Whispering Pines isn't just a collection of houses, Mr. Croft. It's a standard, a commitment to a certain quality of life. We protect our property values. We protect our aesthetic." Her eyes finally locked with his, and in their depths, Liam saw no warmth, no curiosity about the new neighbor who had served his country. He saw only the cold, assessing glare of a warden sizing up a new inmate. "Thoroughness is key," she reiterated, her tone making it clear that this was a warning, not advice. "I suggest you familiarize yourself with the regulations. Promptly. We're very proactive about compliance." As her golf cart, a silent, electric model as pristine as she was, glided noiselessly back to her driveway, Liam felt the serene peace of moments ago shatter. The familiar, unwelcome coil of tension tightened in his shoulders, a conditioned response from countless missions where a calm atmosphere could turn lethal in a heartbeat. This wasn't a friendly neighborly chat. It was a power play. A shot had been fired across his bow over a few inches of unmown grass and a charmingly peeling fence post. He looked down at the binder in his hands, its glossy cover reflecting the bright sun. It represented a world of petty tyrannies, of control masquerading as community. Bev Gallagher saw a disorganized new homeowner, a man she could easily intimidate and mold into her vision of suburban conformity. But as Liam Croft stood on his own land, the ghost of his grandfather's steadfast presence all around him, a grim realization settled in his gut. Bev Gallagher had no idea who she was really dealing with. She saw a simple man. She didn't see the combat engineer who had defused IEDs on treacherous roads and rerouted entire waterways under enemy fire. She had just looked at a man trained in the art of controlled demolition and decided he was an easy target. And that was about to become the single greatest miscalculation of her life. The following Saturday, Liam pulled on his old work boots, the ones still caked with dust from another continent, and decided to walk the full boundary of his inheritance. Pops had always spoken of the back 40 acres with a kind of reverent pride. It was the wild heart of the property, a rolling stretch of Texas hill country that ended at a small hand-built earth dam. That dam was Pop's masterpiece. He'd built it not for profit, but for stewardship, to collect rainwater, manage runoff, and sustain the local watershed. For Liam, it was a sacred place, a monument to his grandfather's quiet wisdom and connection to the land. The walk started as a pilgrimage, the crunch of dry grass underfoot, the call of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, the dense, humid air. It was all a balm to his soul. He followed the familiar path, memories flooding back of hunting trips with Pops, of learning to fish in the dam's reservoir. As he neared the crest of the hill that overlooked the dam, a low, distant rumble began to intrude on the serenity. It was a sound he knew all too well, the growl of heavy diesel engines. His pace quickened, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. When he finally crested the rise, the sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. The land was gone. The serene pasture, once a tapestry of wildflowers and native grasses, was a raw, open wound. The earth had been gouged and flattened, scarred by the deep treads of bulldozers and excavators. A forest of surveyor stakes adorned with garish pink plastic tape marked the graves of ancient oak saplings. Most horrifying of all were the skeletons, the half-built frames of enormous, identical McMansions, standing like alien invaders where the wild things used to grow. A cement truck was pouring a foundation, its monotonous churn a funeral dirge for the land beneath. A cold, hard fury, colder and sharper than anything he'd felt facing enemy combatants, ignited in his chest. This was a violation, a desecration. He marched toward the nearest worker, a foreman in a hard hat studying a blueprint. "What the hell is going on here?" Liam's voice was low, dangerously calm. The foreman looked up, his expression one of bored annoyance. "Construction." "What's it look like?" "This is my land," Liam said, the words gritted out between clenched teeth. "Sorry, buddy," the foreman shrugged, not looking sorry at all. "You've got the wrong info. This is all part of the new Willow Creek Manor expansion. We got permits. It's all legal." "Legal?" The word was a curse. Liam pulled out his phone, his hands trembling with a volatile mix of grief and rage. He called the county sheriff's office. Deputy Miller arrived 20 minutes later, his face a mask of weary resignation. He listened as Liam spilled out his story, his voice cracking with emotion. The deputy's explanation was a gut punch delivered in bureaucratic monotone. "Adverse possession," he said. "It's an old law. If land is considered abandoned, and another party can prove they've been using it or improving it openly for a certain period, they can file a claim for title." While Liam was overseas, and with his sister Chloe overwhelmed by Pop's passing from her home in Seattle, the HOA, under Bev Gallagher's direction, had filed the claim. They'd argued the land was unused, neglected. Their improvement was the destruction now laid out before them. It was then that the architect of this theft made her entrance. Bev Gallagher's golf cart purred up the newly carved dirt road, a stark white anomaly in the sea of brown mud. She didn't get out, simply sat there like a general surveying a conquered territory. "Your family let this land go to waste, dear," she said, her syrupy tone laced with undisguised triumph. "We're just repurposing it for the community's benefit. A new playground, more homes for families, progress." Her smile was a sharp, victorious thing. "You should have taken a more active role in managing your affairs." As her cart silently retreated, Liam stood paralyzed, the legal term adverse possession echoing in his mind like a death knell. But then his training kicked in. A soldier's eyes are trained to assess, to find details others miss. His gaze swept over the devastation and landed on the dam. His heart plummeted a second time. The small, spring-fed creek that had nourished Pop's reservoir for over 4 decades had been brutally diverted. A raw new channel, carved by a backhoe's bucket, now siphoned the water away, directing it toward the construction site, likely for mixing concrete and dust control. The water level in the dam was already visibly lower, a bathtub ring of cracked, dry mud exposed along its banks. This wasn't just about land. They were stealing the water. They were killing the legacy Pops had poured his soul into. The dam was a living, breathing part of the ecosystem, a tool for life, and they were treating it as a utility, standing there, watching the lifeblood of his heritage be stolen drop by drop. The soldier in Liam Croft snapped into a cold, hyper-focused clarity. The shock and grief were burned away, replaced by a crystalline, unwavering determination. This was no longer a property dispute. It was a hostile takeover, an act of war. As he turned his back on the destruction and marched toward his house, a plan already beginning to form in his mind. One thought was crystal clear. Bev Gallagher thought she was dealing with a grieving grandson. She was about to find out she'd declared war on a combat engineer. And he had just identified her first and most critical vulnerability. The following Monday, Liam walked into the polished, intimidating offices of a land use attorney in downtown Austin. The air smelled of expensive coffee and anxious clients. The lawyer, a man named Henderson with a suit that cost more than Liam's truck, listened with a practiced, detached expression. He tapped his pen on a legal pad, his eyes glazing over as Liam explained the adverse possession claim, the zoning, the water diversion. When Liam finished, Henderson leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It's a tough one, Mr. Croft. Adverse possession claims are tricky to overturn, especially when the other side has deep pockets and political connections." He named a figure for a retainer that made Liam's stomach lurch. "And that's just to start. We're looking at a long, expensive fight. They're counting on you not having the resources or the will to see it through." The system, Liam realized with a sinking feeling, wasn't just rigged. It was a fortress designed to keep people like him out. Dejected, he drove to the county clerk's office, a place that felt more like his speed. It was there, while making formal requests for copies of the HOA's permits, that he stumbled upon the connection. The construction company, Gallagher & Sons Development, was owned by none other than Richard "Rick" Gallagher, Bev's husband. And Rick Gallagher, he discovered with a quick online search, was also a city councilman. The conflict of interest was so blatant it was audacious. While Liam was defusing bombs in Kandahar, Councilman Gallagher had been fast-tracking an emergency zoning modification, seamlessly transforming Croft agricultural land into a lucrative residential zone. Defeated in the modern arena of legal warfare, Liam retreated to an ancient battlefield, the county records archive. It was a cavernous room in the old courthouse basement, smelling of dust, decaying paper, and the faint, sweet scent of old ink. For days he became a fixture there, a ghost haunting the stacks. He wasn't just looking for a loophole. He was on an archaeological dig, searching for a weapon buried in the strata of time. He started with the recent property transfers, then worked his way backward through decades of ledgers and microfilm. His eyes grew strained, his fingers blackened from handling century-old documents. It was tedious, soul-crushing work, but it was a mission. And Liam Croft knew how to complete a mission. The first breakthrough came tucked behind a mundane tax assessment from 1979. It was Pops's original dam construction permit. But this wasn't just a simple county form. It was a detailed, multi-page document, stamped and co-signed by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Pops hadn't just built a pond. He had collaborated on a federally recognized flood control and watershed management project. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. That single faded stamp changed the entire game. The HOA's petty kingdom, with its 3-inch binder of rules, had just collided with the full, immense weight of the United States government. The adrenaline was so sharp he could taste it, coppery and electric on his tongue. But the mother lode, the true weapon of mass destruction, was still buried. His hunt became a fever. He searched for anything related to water, to creeks, to rights. And then, in a misfiled box of deeds from the 1920s, his fingers closed around a brittle, yellowed piece of parchment. It was a water rights deed from 1923, purchased by his great-grandfather. Alistair Croft. These were senior water rights, a concept in Western water law that meant first in time, first in right. These rights were older than the town itself, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those half-built McMansions. They weren't just stealing his land. They were stealing water that was legally, historically, and morally his before their grandparents were even born. He had them. He had them on a federal jurisdictional issue and on a century-old water law technicality. These weren't paper clips. They were paper bombs. Armed with these revelations, Liam watched Bev Gallagher's next public move with a new, cold clarity. She went on the local evening news, standing before a backdrop of her perfectly manicured community. She spoke with trembling concern, a tissue clutched in her hand, about the dangerous, unstable dam structure upstream. She painted a picture of a ticking time bomb, a threat to the safety of the community's children, a narrative carefully crafted to paint Liam as a reckless menace. The bureaucratic harassment escalated in tandem. A formal citation appeared on his door for unsightly structures, his century-old farmhouse. Another arrived for an environmental hazard, his perfectly functional, recently inspected septic system. A neighborhood safety patrol, comprised of HOA board members, began parking at his property line, taking photos of his visitors, writing down license plates. It was a classic squeeze play, a tactic to overwhelm and exhaust him into submission. But Liam was no longer the shocked, grieving grandson desperately trying to defend his home. He was a combat engineer who had just finished mapping the enemy's fortifications and had identified the precise location of their ammunition dump. The HOA was about to learn a brutal lesson, that the most powerful weapon in a modern conflict isn't always a bulldozer or a lawyer's threat. It's a piece of paper that's older than their entire neighborhood, waiting in the archives for the right soldier to find it. A lone soldier can hold a position against incredible odds, but to win a war, you need an army. Liam knew that his paper bombshells were powerful, but in a fight against local corruption and a well-funded HOA, they needed voices, witnesses, and collective will. He could no longer be a fortress under siege. He had to become the catalyst for a rebellion. His first recruitment was his immediate neighbor to the east, Ms. Anya Petrova. She was a spry woman in her late 70s with eyes that held the wisdom of a long life and a spine of tempered steel. Her property, which had been in her family since they emigrated from Poland, was famous for its magnificent garden, a sprawling, vibrant tapestry of vegetables, herbs, and flowers that had fed and delighted the neighborhood for decades, or it had been. When Liam approached her, he found her standing in the midst of a patch of cracked brown earth. The once lush plants were withered skeletons. "The water," she said, her voice heavy with a grief that mirrored his own. She pointed a bony finger toward the diverted creek. "For 50 years, that creek fed my irrigation ditch. Now it feeds their concrete mixer." She showed him faded black and white photographs of her mother, a proud woman in a headscarf tending the same garden, its lifeblood the very water Bev Gallagher had stolen. Her testimony wasn't just evidence. It was a story of generational sustenance being severed by sheer greed. His next ally was Carlos Reyes, a third-generation rancher whose land lay further downstream. Liam found him mending a fence on his parched property, the ground hard and dusty underfoot. Carlos's handshake was calloused and strong, his expression grim. "Your grandfather," Carlos said, "he was a good man, a man of his word. When the droughts came, he would open the spillway gates on that dam, just a trickle, enough to keep our stock tanks full and our crops from dying. He never asked for a thing in return." Carlos's voice grew thick with emotion. He understood that water is life. These people, these Gallaghers, their word is written on water, and it evaporates by noon. Through online forums and community groups dedicated to fighting HOA overreach, Liam uncovered a disturbing pattern. The Gallaghers had a history. This wasn't their first land grab. It was their business model. In a town 40 miles away, they had used nearly identical tactics: pressure, harassment, mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company, to seize a small parcel for a clubhouse expansion. They were predators, and Whispering Pines was their new hunting ground. Liam's modest farmhouse underwent a transformation. It became a command center. Maps of the watershed were spread across his kitchen table, annotated with his precise engineering calculations of water flow and loss. Timeline charts of the Gallagher's construction progress were pinned to the walls. He reached out to a lawyer recommended by his Army network, Elena Vance, a fierce environmental attorney with a reputation for taking on hopeless cases and winning. She saw Liam's case not as a simple property dispute, but as a landmark battle for water rights and against corporate-style corruption, and she agreed to work pro bono. The coalition grew. The local chapter of the Sierra Club got involved, outraged that the creek diversion had decimated the nesting habitat for a population of endangered golden-cheeked warblers. A geology professor from the university provided a report on how the diversion was causing dangerous upstream siltation. Bev Gallagher, sensing the shift in momentum, abandoned all pretense of civility. She unleashed her worst. Liam's trail cameras, which he had set up to document the water theft, now captured footage of hired hands in tactical gear attempting to sabotage the dam's spillway controls with bags of quickset concrete. It was an act of staggering recklessness. If the gates were opened with a blockage, it could cause a genuine catastrophic failure. This wasn't harassment. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. Deputy Miller, now fully aware of the escalating war, intervened, arresting the men who, predictably, worked for a private security firm on the HOA's payroll. Undeterred, Bev then staged a protest. She mobilized 24 of her most devoted HOA members, who lined up at Liam's property line with matching polo shirts, folding chairs, and professionally printed Protect Our Children signs. They live-streamed their vigil, portraying themselves as brave citizens standing up to a dangerous, unstable madman. But Liam was ready. He was no longer on the defensive. He had his own army. Carlos Reyes and Ms. Petrova organized their own group, a crowd of farmers, elderly residents, and young environmentalists who believed in the cause. The two groups now stood facing each other across the dusty road, a perfect stark snapshot of the war for the soul of the community. The stage was set for a final public showdown. Liam Croft was no longer the desperate defender behind his walls. He was the commander of a united front, and he was about to show the HOA what happens when you push an engineer and an entire community too far. The Gallaghers, cornered and desperate, played what they believed was their final unbeatable card. Using his political influence, Rick Gallagher secured an emergency injunction hearing. The venue was the courtroom of Judge Henry Walsh, a man known to be a regular golf partner of Rick's and the recipient of sizable campaign contributions from his development company. The hearing was scheduled for 6 a.m., a blatant attempt to catch Liam and his lawyer off guard and to minimize media attention. Their request: a full restraining order to legally bar Liam from even touching the spillway controls of his own dam, citing an imminent and catastrophic public safety risk. The courtroom at dawn was a pressure cooker. Bev Gallagher arrived with a phalanx of high-priced Houston attorneys, their suits sharp, their briefcases gleaming. Liam stood beside Elena Vance, who looked calm and focused, a stack of meticulously organized files in front of her. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, stale coffee, and naked tension. Bev's legal team opened with theatrical flair. They presented blown-up, doctored photographs showing water lapping at the foundations of the new homes, images that were later proven to be from a different flood years prior. They wheeled in a hired-gun psychiatrist who, without ever meeting Liam, confidently diagnosed him with post-service paranoia and combat-related revenge fantasies, based solely on Bev's statements and newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the lead attorney boomed, gesturing dramatically toward Liam, "this disturbed individual is using specialized military knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He has turned water into a weapon." Then Elena Vance stood. She moved with a quiet, unnerving calm. "Your Honor, if I may," she began, her voice clear and cutting through the theatrics. She first entered Pops's original 1978 dam permit into evidence, highlighting the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stamp. She then called an EPA investigator to the stand, who testified under oath that Liam's proposed controlled spillway release was not only safe, but was a lawful and environmentally beneficial act to restore a natural waterway. But the true death knell for the Gallaghers' case came next. Elena requested to play an audio recording. As the judge was about to dismiss it, she calmly stated, "Your Honor, Texas is a one-party consent state." The recording clicked on. Rick Gallagher's voice, unmistakable and livid, filled the silent courtroom. That psycho is destroying millions in property value. I don't care what it takes, Walsh. You fix this. My campaign funded your bench. Now you get off it and do your damn job. The judge's face went from bored to ashen in a heartbeat. The corruption was laid bare in his own courtroom, captured in high-fidelity audio. The carefully constructed facade of public safety crumbled into dust, revealing the rotten core of political graft and personal enrichment. Judge Walsh, seeing the federal investigators sitting in the back of his courtroom and realizing his own career was on the line, had no choice. He denied the restraining order in a terse, hurried ruling, refusing to even look at the Gallaghers. By 7:02 a.m., a crowd had gathered at the base of Pop's Dam. News helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures. On one side of the property line, Bev's protesters waved their signs, their chants growing increasingly frantic. On the other side, Liam's allies, Carlos, Ms. Petrova, the farmers, the environmentalists, stood in a quiet, determined solidarity. Liam climbed the steps to the spillway control house, a small, concrete block structure he had spent the previous week meticulously restoring. He could feel the eyes of the world on him. He saw Bev Gallagher, her face a contorted mask of fury, live streaming on her phone, screaming about terrorism and destruction. With a steady hand born from a lifetime of executing precise operations under pressure, Liam engaged the hydraulic pump. The mechanism, silent for decades, groaned to life. Then, with a deep resonant shudder that was felt in the chest more than heard, the main spillway gates began to rise. But this was no biblical deluge. It was a calculated, masterful act of engineering. The water did not rage. It returned. It poured forth in a powerful, controlled surge, a massive, liquid sigh of relief. It flowed with purposeful grace into the original dry creek bed, winding its way around the HOA's illegal concrete barriers, cascading over rocks that had been dry for over a year. It was life itself, restoring the path that nature had carved centuries ago. Bev's screams were drowned out by the magnificent roar of the water and the sudden, joyous cheers from Carlos's group. Carlos himself knelt by the creek, his weathered hands dipping into the water, his shoulders shaking with unrestrained emotion. Ms. Petrova watched, a serene, triumphant smile on her face as the water filled her irrigation ditches for the first time in 18 months. The local news broadcast, which Bev had hoped would capture her victory, instead showed a powerful, beautiful story of ecological restoration. The narrative of a dangerous veteran was washed away by the simple, undeniable truth of the flowing water. It wasn't destroying anything. It was healing the land. Liam Croft hadn't unleashed chaos. He had restored order. He had used the enemy's own weapon, the law, and his own expertise to execute a flawless, non-violent counterstrike. And as the water flowed free, it washed away the HOA's lies, exposing the rotten foundation their entire empire was built on for the entire world to see. In the days and weeks that followed the spillway opening, the Gallagher empire collapsed with a speed that was both stunning and deeply satisfying. The audio recording from the courtroom was picked up by state news outlets, triggering an immediate investigation by the Texas Ethics Commission. Facing overwhelming evidence of conspiracy, bribery, and abuse of power, Rick Gallagher resigned from the city council and, in a desperate bid for a lighter sentence, took a plea deal that included 18 months in a federal penitentiary. Bev Gallagher, now socially ostracized and buried under millions of dollars in civil penalties from the EPA and lawsuits from defrauded homeowners, filed for bankruptcy. The for sale sign on her perfectly manicured lawn went up within a month, and she vanished from Whispering Pines, becoming a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood potlucks. The Whispering Pines Estates HOA was dissolved by a unanimous vote of the remaining residents, its draconian covenants rendered null and void. In its place, a new neighborhood association was formed, with Carlos Reyes and Ms. Anya Petrova on its inaugural board. Their first act was to formally apologize to Liam and to establish a community garden on a corner of his restored land, a symbol of their renewed commitment to stewardship, not control. With the legal war won, the real physical healing began. The water rights were officially and permanently restored to the Croft family. The construction on the stolen back 40 acres ground to a permanent halt. The half-built McMansions, now worthless without their fraudulent water access, were dismantled, and the land was given back to nature. Within a single season, native grasses and wildflowers began to reclaim the scarred earth, a vibrant green blanket stitching the wound closed. The local ecosystem, once starved and silenced, rebounded with breathtaking vigor. The population of golden-cheeked warblers returned, their distinctive songs once again echoing through the hills. The creek, now flowing freely, teemed with life again. Liam used the substantial financial settlement from the subsequent insurance fraud and civil lawsuits to establish the Popscroft Conservation Trust, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting Texas watersheds and advocating for property rights against corrupt development. The Trust's first full-ride scholarship was awarded to Carlos Reyes's daughter, Isabella, a bright, fierce young woman who vowed to become an environmental lawyer. "You fought for our water, Mr. Croft," she told him. "I'm going to fight for everyone's." For Liam, the victory was more than legal or financial. It was the peace he had originally sought when he first drove down that gravel road. He poured his heart and his engineering skills into lovingly restoring the old cottage, using sustainable methods and reclaimed materials. The project healed him as much as it healed the land. His sister Chloe, inspired by his fight, moved back from Seattle, and together they started a small agro-tourism business, offering tours of the restored watershed and the story behind it. His professional partnership with Elena Vance, forged in the fires of their shared righteous battle, slowly blossomed into something deeper and more personal. They were a formidable team, their strengths perfectly complementary, his calm, analytical precision and her fiery, brilliant legal mind. Now, from his front porch at sunset, Liam Croft sits in the rocking chair that once belonged to Pops. He listens to the gentle, constant music of the restored creek, a sound more beautiful to him than any symphony. It is a sound of victory, yes, but more than that, it is a sound of continuity. It is the sound of his grandfather's legacy, of stewardship, community, and quiet, unyielding strength, flowing once more, as timeless and relentless as the water itself. The old garden shed still leans slightly. The shutters are still a faded sage green, and Liam wouldn't have it any other way. The HOA thought they were untouchable. They believed their wealth, their political connections, and their 3-inch binder of rules made them the ultimate authority. They thought they could steal a legacy and get away with it, but they picked a fight with the wrong man, on the wrong land. They learned a brutal final lesson. You can mess with a lot of things in this world, but you never ever mess with a combat engineer's water. For when you do, you don't just face the man. You face the entire river of history, law, and community that flows behind him.